And good evening, everybody, on this wonderful Mother's Day. Welcome to the interview room. I don't know about you, but you better put your seatbelts on because we're about ready to take off. And man, what a panel we have here tonight. We want to thank everybody. We want to thank everybody for being here. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Yes. Welcome to our mods. Teresa M, Maui Girl, Mimi J2, Miss Sophia and Laura. Welcome to, or congratulations on your children who just graduated. We have Dr. Ann Burgess is going to be in the house tonight, and she knows what that's all about. And same with Dr. Brucato. If this is your first time here on the interview room, we ask one thing and one thing only, and that you subscribe, hit a thumbs up, and send this to all of your media contacts, because we have a show for you. An all-star lineup starting with Greg Cooper, former FBI profiler. Not only that, he was the behavior science unit chief at one point for a little bit after his in his days in the FBI. Then we've got the assistant executive director, Dean Jackson, here from the Cold Case Foundation. And then, of course, Dr. Ann Burgess, who is a legend. If you do not know Dr. Burgess, just Google her. She is an amazing human being and was actually one of the first forensic nurses, who helped put the behavior science unit on the map by helping them organize themselves. And they actually did a show about her life. So you'll get to meet Ann tonight. And then, of course, Dr. Gary Brucato, a colleague of Dr. Burgess. All of their bios are going to be below. So don't forget to hit those. And let's get this show on the road, shall we? So I'm going to bring in Greg, but he's got his camera off. So I'm going to bring in ladies first. Dr. Burgess, welcome in.
Thank you, Chris.
It's great to have you here. And then Greg Cooper, you've seen this face.
Hi, Chris. You can't miss it.
Yeah, it's either the post office or TV. But
Yeah.
either one of those, we're going to put Greg up in the #1 position up there on the far right. And then, of course, his sidekick, these two are attached at the hip, Mr. Dean Jackson.
Hey, guys.
It's great to have you here, Dean.
Usually I try to wear a hat so they can tell the difference between us.
Exactly. And then, of course, the other legend in the house, our dear friend and also another friend or a colleague from the Cold Case Foundation. Everybody on this panel tonight is in the Cold Case Foundation, but none other than, and by the way, this is the other face that you're either going to find at the post office or on TV, between Dr. Gary Brucato. Gary, welcome. It's great to have every one of you here this evening. Man, oh man. I don't know I don't even know how I want to start this show tonight, other than I have a lineup. And what I want to do is go in 3 phases. Yeah, we already have almost 2,000 people here watching. So the arena's full. And obviously, Gary, Dean, Greg, and we started talking about this case back in November of 2022. And it was kind of like, hey, go up there, get an assessment kind of thing. And Karen and I went up there on Thanksgiving Day, thinking it would be empty, et cetera. And we came back and we showed the video and we started talking about it. And so I want to do this in 3 phases. And the first phase is who? Because that was the first question, right? When we first approached this. And so I'm going to show a clip of that question early on. And then we got Ann and Gary and everybody assembled. And we asked, what? Inside the mind. Get inside the mind of this individual. And that's where Gary, knocked it in a couple of different directions. And the third piece of this, with Ann, when she talked, she measured and pushed in Kemper, what Ed Kemper had said.
Yeah.
You guys all remember those conversations, essentially?
Yep.
Okay, so what I've done is I've compressed some video together, and at any time, if you want to stop or if you want to make a comment from what we knew, what we were thinking then to what we know now, the most latest Dateline. And I have to be honest with you, that was a fantastic, well-produced program. And I think, it's going to take off to eternity and beyond. There was a tremendous amount of information there. And, I want to get into your guys' head about, what you think about all of that, right? But before we get there, there's a new nickname that the Idaho Statesman has put up. They're giving him a name, the Idaho Bundy. All right, first question. What say you about this?
Well, we certainly know that he's happy about it. And it's definitely consistent with what we know with respect to some of the folks that he had selected as his mentors. Gary's got a great explanation behind that from a psychological perspective, but I look at it a little bit differently, and that is trying to interpret or translate profiling into everyday types of language for people to understand what we mean by profiling. And so with respect to Bundy, I think it just falls in the category of his selection of mentors that he idolized and selected as his heroes, so to speak. All of us have mentors. All of us have heroes. His selection of mentors and heroes are just much different than the rest of us.
And that was actually the New York Post. I misspoke. I said the Idaho Statesman, and Karen just sent me a text, said, no, it's the New York Post. So I got that wrong, but we just corrected it. Anybody else have a comment about that, about this?
I'll just pipe in. Excuse me.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to follow up on what Greg said is what we're finding in some of our research on these manifestos that they do. They all have as you call them, the mentor or the hero, whatever. And I just think that's very, very interesting. That would certainly be something you'd want to talk with him about, of why he picked Bundy as the one. I just think that's fascinating, and they all have one. So, Gary, I didn't mean to, but you had some.
No. I could listen to you all day. Feel free. I think that Bundy is an especially interesting person to emulate, because if you are someone who is a social failure, I could imagine you being very drawn to somebody that had the power of being attractive and charming people, instead of having to, assault them to have a connection with them. And I think that is precisely what I think would draw somebody to Bundy if they were a Kohberger type. Is that this quality of being able to be a chameleon and be sort of successful socially, and being able to woo and manipulate in that way. So I feel like it's not surprising. And I also thought it was very interesting that if you paid careful attention on the Dateline episode, you saw that wasn't the only serial killer that he seemed to be interested in. And there also appeared to be an interest in David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who I think is a lot more in line with the Kohberger type of what he really is, so that you could see being drawn to the more schlubby social failure, but wishing that you are the chameleon-like attractive type at the same time. So I found that very interesting. Greg, did you catch that he had the son of Sam there too?
Yes, I do remember that, and maybe you splice that in there, Chris.
Yeah,
because I know that was one of the conversations that we had in the past.
yeah. So let's go back to the very first time, so folks understand. The Cold Case Foundation, we were already in Idaho working on another situation when this thing went down. And so I went over there, and then we came back with some video, and I asked Greg and Dean to weigh in. And this was November 28th of 2022. And so I want to play a little bit about that, listen to the assessment, and then at any time, guys, as we're going through this, Greg, Dean, Gary, Dr. Burgess, and just stop me and say, you know what, this is what we were thinking then, and let's correlate it to what we know now. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put this up and put your seatbelt on.
It would strike me about this is that anybody that's going into that area, it's intentional. They're not just roaming. There's one way in, basically, and evidently, and one way out, with the exception of going through side streets in that neighborhood. But in order to get out of that neighborhood, you have to go down that main street, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it's intentional. Whoever.
So I want to set this up maybe a little bit deeper here as well. Gary, or excuse me, Greg, and in the BAU, if I was an investigator, I would send in a case file, and you guys would essentially ask for a briefing. And this is what basically I did here. What we're seeing here, and so the audience understands how this stuff can kind of unfold, is this is November 28th, and it was November 24th, so it's 4 days later. And I'm presenting this to, let's say, obviously Greg and Dean at that point. This is what we're looking at. Help people understand why that is important in the investigative process, if you would.
Well, from the perspective of what we did back at the Behavioral Science Unit, and what I assume they still do today, is there's strength in numbers and different perspectives. And we look at it from the perspective that based upon people's background, a collective, an aggregate of people's background, we put a review team together, it may consist of 3, 4, 5 people, more. We've had as many as 13 people on a case, for example. And because of their background, training and education and experience, it allows you to merge those things together and come up with a more finely tuned, in my opinion, a more finely tuned assessment or analysis of the behavior, not just behavior, but the associated personality characteristics with that behavior. Not just the characteristics of the imaginary person, but also the thought process and the behavioral criminal conduct that's being committed, an explanation of what the offender's thinking, what they're focusing on, what they're targeting, why they've selected a certain victim. Is this an impulsive crime versus one that has been planned for a period of time? And so through collusion with additional experts, we usually come up with the much more accurate assessment than working independently. Even when we would work independently, we would request there at the academy, we would request a subsequent follow-up case analysis with a team of people to review our individual assessment and analysis of the case with them, to get feedback and edit accordingly. Hopefully that answers what you're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're getting a little feedback, and I think, Gary, it's coming through your speaker. But here we go.
Is there whoever either resides there or is visiting there for one reason or another is there on purpose. They're not just walking around randomly. They aren't, or they may be visiting. They could be visiting friends, visiting family, coming in and out of that area with the intent of something specific, whether they live there or they're visiting somebody or they're there for some kind of work, support work in the neighborhood, for example. But it's not a random kind of roaming that you're going to be seeing. This is not an area that people would just drive through for sightseeing, that type of thing. But they have an on purpose, intentional purpose for being there, and so does the offender in this case.
So I think that's pretty clear based on the latest information with his a digital footprint. How many times did Dateline report he was around there approximately?
They said that he was there. His phone pops up three more times, so a total of 4 times in October. And that in the 4 months prior to that, they said that he had made 23 trips to the area. So over a 4-month period of time, which would be consistent with somebody coming in and scoping that area out.
Okay, so if I'm going to put a scoreboard up, Greg, home run, 1-0.
Well, we don't know exactly why they referred to it as a targeted event. It would be open to speculation, and that may be accurate speculation. But typically when we talk about a targeted event, it suggests that that these victims were intentionally identified as victims and as potential victims prior to the event.
Okay, so what do we know about that piece of the puzzle?
Well, we know that he was looking at Instagram quite a bit during this period of time, and if I'm correct, I believe that Kaylee, I think it was one of the places that he had identified her through the Instagram, or am I correct on that?
I think he identified a group of their circle of friends.
Yeah.
And so it appears at this point that he was definitely trolling other sorority houses too. Gary, what's your thought on that?
Well, what was very striking and in many ways was sort of downplayed in the episode, but really jumped out as horrifying if you really thought it through, is that he had very large numbers of photographs of other women who were attractive young women who sort of had a lot of the same physical characteristics, who were clad in bikinis and so forth. And you really got the sense that the individuality of one of the victims that he might have had in mind was not important. What mattered was that the person had certain physical characteristics that might make them an excellent surrogate for whoever it is that he was actually upset about. So you imagine somebody just going through loops of people who are young and female and physically attractive and thinking, who might be the one who best fits the fantasy and how might I access them? And the other thing that I thought was very horrifying was that it seemed to become clear that the videos that were posted on places like Instagram could be used as intel, because you could see things like where the windows are in the house and where the doors are, and is there a dog, and on there. So we start to understand somebody who is feeling that he has an intimacy with a person that he's never met because he's inside their house and watching their behaviors and understanding them. And you imagine that ultimately, once he hones in on somebody that he thinks nicely fits the fantasy, he's relentless. And then there's this process of building up nerve and stalking and gathering intel. I think on the show, I compared it to like the ever small loops of a predator animal that's just getting closer and closer to the. And Greg, did they show us on the show? Didn't they show footage where he just kept circling the house that night until he seems to finally go in?
That's right. He went in and out.
Did you interpret that it had to do with? But was your sense, because I didn't hear your answers, and I was wondering, did you see that as that he couldn't build up the nerve, or that he was just looking to see who was home, or what was your interpretation of why he kept looping like that?
I think it's probably a mix. He's going back and forth, wondering, is it the right time? He's selected a time. He goes in the area. He's looking to see if there are lights on, if there may be people who are awake in the rooms. And also, I think he's gauging his level of confidence as whether or not he's going to follow through with what his intention is. That would be my interpretation.
Anne, do you have any thoughts on that?
I just think it's impressive that I have wondered whether you might have even caught the car when you showed that, because now we know what the car, what was white and it was a certain type. But you certainly were spot on to do that. I just was real impressed that. But also, don't forget the fantasy is building. That this is all, as they say, it can be as exciting as the actual crime itself. That the circling and that the fantasy keeps building and so forth. Do they know how were the young women in and out that night? I can't remember whether they were, that he might have. I think they went out to get something to the little food cart.
Right,
So
the grub truck.
Yeah.
They're down to the timeline. They got the timeline down. And
okay.
Yeah, 100%. Great thoughts. Let's keep moving.
How do they make that determination? There's a number of things that they would look at. The location of the home, how entrance may or may not have been made, the types of behavior that may be there manifest between the victim and the offender, the way in which the crime may have been committed from a behavioral perspective. We look at, and one of the first things that we look at in any case is victimology. That for whatever reason, the authorities have determined, or at least initially believe, that it's an isolated incident, meaning that the offender had no other interest in potentially looking at other victims. And when I say that initially. And we don't know what the offender may be experiencing subsequently, only that the individual is there intentionally, on purpose, has identified that particular location for a specific reason. Is it for convenience? Well, there's a lot of homes in that area. Is it most likely it's because they not only have access and familiarity to the crime scene in this case, or the home, but one has to ask the question, so why select that home? Why select that residence?
Okay, so let's ask that question. I'm going to ask it to the panel. Why do you think he selected that house? No wrong answer.
Well, from my perspective, I think he selected it because he had a specific target, at least one target in mind. The reason he selected the home is because his object of interest most likely is in that home. And he's intentionally gauging that to make the determination of their schedule, what their pattern of behavior is, when they're home, when they're not home, what time they get home. Basically a lifestyle, a pattern of lifestyle, that whatever his target or whomever that target is, he wants to know as much as he possibly can about it.
Did it surprise anybody that his phone was pinging so close to the house, within 100 meters, they reported?
No, not to me. I think it just further accentuates his attempt to become familiar with the area, with the house, the residence, and the traffic in the area, how he would get in, how he would get out, and particularly the behavioral patterns of whoever's target was.
I did find it interesting that on the night of the attack that he does shut his phone off. And yet on all these other occasions, they've pinged him right into that area. So the one night that he's kind of made the determination to execute, he does shut it off, but he wasn't thinking about that probably prior to that. And maybe part of that process was his recon of trying to figure out for sure where he was going to be. And I think the other thing that strikes me is, and I know we talked about this clear back in that November timeline when we were with you, Chris, and that is, I think that house in particular is, remember we talked about how the backyard, especially because you had that parking lot up above.
I select those victims.
It really makes it easy if this is late at night, dark, if he's wearing dark clothing, to slip down that little embankment. Even if he doesn't park up there, if he parks somewhere, he can slip down in behind. We even talked about, I think there was, wasn't there a brick or a block or something there that would have been
right
perfect
under this window
there and watch through the window and observe. I think for a lot of people, what they don't think about is, hunters go into target-rich environments and then they keep going back and back and back before they take their prey and spend time in there getting accustomed to all of the behaviors and stuff. So I think if you kind of say, well, what if this guy was looking for targets, maybe zoned in or zoomed in on these particular one or two in that home, but then just kept coming back, watching and waiting and looking for an opportunity. And then to your question earlier, when you were talking about what everybody was doing, I think they said around 4 a.m. By that time, everybody had kind of settled in. People were going to sleep. But I think was it Zaina got the DoorDash at around 4 in the morning. So part of it too is if other people are in the neighborhood, he's driving around waiting maybe for things to die down, because it seems like from the timeline, at least they gave on Dateline, that, at 4:06, he takes a U-turn and comes right back as seen, prior, the 38 minutes prior to that, he's moving all around the neighborhood, kind of watching. The car keeps being seen. But then at 4:07, it approaches the house, and by 4:20, it's seen going back out of there. So there's not a lot of time spent in the house itself, if that timeline's correct.
Yeah, what's interesting about this too, as we go back for a moment, and if you're just joining with us, this was a tape from November 28th, 2022. So it was within 2 weeks, and they were still searching. The authorities were still searching this back embankment area. I didn't film them, but they were still back there working when this was filmed. And it's interesting now what we know. Does everybody agree that this was the perfect location for him to be sitting and kind of a fishbowl opportunity into that house? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And so I want to move forward here and go to the December 21st video now, where we all got together, and I want to talk about his mindset. This is that cinder block that we were talking about, Greg, Dean, and Gary, and my feeling's always been this is a seat. And he's been popping in and out. This is Dylan's room. You guys got any thoughts to that while we're looking at it real fast before we go to the mindset?
Well, I think I think we all agree that the motive in this case had a lot to do with some expression of sex, as a sexual component. And in fact, there almost seems to be a metaphor in the inability to feel ready to go into the house, the feeling of inadequacy that one might feel circling over and over again and not feeling able, feels like for an inadequate guy that can't seem to be sexual in a normal way. And what I think is that the plan, the whatever was intended, probably had a sexual component to it. I've wondered, for example, if in imitation of Bundy, there might have been a fantasy of abducting the victim, taking her perhaps to that park that was used in the alibi that was scoped out with hikes and so forth, because you'd need to be alone with the victim to play out a fantasy and dominate them and make them say certain things or whatever. And I think that we'd agree. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, but I think there must have been a sexual heating up with some peeping, possibly even masturbatory behavior or something, where you're watching that house and building up toward what was intended to be some sort of assault. And I wonder what the group thinks, but it seems difficult to believe that if there was peeping, that there wasn't a sexual component to that. Do you guys share that impression?
Dr. M?
Yeah, I'd agree. The other thing I would think about is that he was getting comfortable with the area, as they rarely can commit a crime without feeling comfortable. And this isn't like he had been there before. He came from Pennsylvania, and he's out there in Idaho. So I bet that was some, it would fit in with what you're saying too, Gary. I'm surprised they didn't try to find some evidence, and maybe they did, that he had, he had been there prior times.
The pornography that was discussed on Dateline is a strong clue of, just as you said, Greg, on the show, the pornography, the themes of it are so suggestive of somebody using sex as a means of domination, power, control, so forth. And I feel like peeping is just another form of experiencing power over people, especially who are asleep and don't know they're being looked at and are being forced to play stuff out that don't even know that they're being watched. How godlike he must have felt if he did that. But I think, Chris, that the back would be the perfect place for that. Imagine the nerve of just sitting on a brick and looking in like that, if that's what you're suggesting.
Or in the car. I mean, right? Both. I think both were in play. I mean, from our initial assessment, I think we were all in agreement that, whoever did this, and back then, it was this idea of, no, this just didn't happen. This guy built up to this point. In fact, we were even looking at, the dog. Remember the dog incident?
Mm-hmm.
There was a question about the dog incident. There was a question about the undergarments of the girl's car, on the other street. What what the the way to get in, the way to get out through the geological profile aspect of things. But one of the things that has stuck with me, that Greg had mentioned, in the very big early on in this situation, was, the buildup here, that he came there for a purpose. And that was the next interview or the next video that I did, was he knows the neighborhood. Okay. And after, I went out there and we started, and when you stand there and you look at this house and you go, this house, number one, it's so quirky. I mean, it's designed, the second floor looks like it's, just off base. It's a slider from the kitchen. And then we started, theorizing and hypothesizing about, okay, what's the POI? What's the point of entry here? Where was this guy going to go? And every one of us said he's going to go through either the slider, and he's going to go through that slider because it was the most convenient, number one, and he was probably the most familiar with it. And I think, Greg, at one point you'd even mentioned early on, you won't be surprised if he hadn't been in that house and at some point. Do you remember saying that, Greg?
Yes, yeah, I do. I think, and particularly as you look at the behavior at the crime scene, where he goes after he makes the initial entrance, it doesn't appear that he's searching throughout the residence, but he makes a direct line to that first set of victims, which is the top floor. And so I think we knew that back then. And so that suggested that he was familiar with that house. He knew where he was going. He knew that the condition they would be in. I think you think about the personality of this offender. This individual goes certainly into the cloak of darkness. So he's hiding. He's like a night ghoul. And that's because he's comfortable. He's comfortable at night because he's not seen. In his own mind, he's not being seen. And he goes in to attack very vulnerable victims. It shows you this level of weakness that he has, and this lack of confidence in himself and his ability to control these victims. They're vulnerable, they're asleep. In this particular case, they're asleep, as well as under the influence of alcohol. All of them were that evening. I think he knew that. He was very confident in that. And he knows that they're going to provide the least resistance, the least effective resistance anyway, even if they try to protect themselves and defend themselves. It's not going to be something that he won't easily be able to overcome, because of course he's prepared to follow through with the knife. So he's fully intentional in killing somebody. He's not just trying to scare somebody. He goes immediately right at it, engages into that activity and the assault. So this is an individual whose personality-wise his lack of self-confidence, his lack of self-esteem and ability to go about committing a crime like this and engaging with the victim. He doesn't want to talk with the victims. He's not interested in that. He's not trying to control through discussion, persuasion. So it's just an immediate assault, sustained aggression.
That's a perfect segue into why we reassembled. And we started talking about those psychological, angles of this situation at the time. And that was in December 21st. We reassembled. And this time we brought Dr. Brucato in to the conversation. And it was a point blank, what say you? And right now there's almost 5,000 people here. And this is what was said almost 2 years ago, collectively as a group.
Section was like, and interaction was like. in terms of.
And Greg, that was interesting. You were talking about the intersection, and we now have video of him taking off out of there and screeching. In fact, they reported on Dateline he almost ran somebody over. You know, the Elantra anyway, right? Who's ever driving the Elantra?
I have a quick question. Maybe
Yeah, go
you
ahead.
can clarify this, but it seemed to me like on the Dateline show that one of the things they referenced was that Kaylee and Zaina, did they normally room together, or was that an unexpected thing for them to be together? I got the sense that they don't normally aren't in the same room, or am I confused by that?
Gary,
It sounded like they sometimes would, but that the hypothesis is that he makes like a beeline for Maddie's room. That's why they think she was the central target. But it appears that he was surprised to discover her there, and that hence she has to also be eliminated. You know, but so that the idea seems to be, the supposition is he's focused on her, goes in thinking he's going to do whatever he's going to do, and then everything goes to hell because there's someone else in the room, another woman in the house. Zaina interrupts. He drops the sheath. He runs downstairs. He stabs her, and then stabs Ethan in the bed. And then, for whatever reason, which I think we're going to get into because the audience is asking for it left, right, and center, he takes the time apparently to make these cuts or carvings on Ethan. So that it really does seem like everything just kind of went haywire. But what's fascinating is that even under the pressure, he seemed very rapidly to be able to do what he did in an organized way. And one of the things that keeps rattling through my head with everything we're talking about, even so far, with the going in the middle of the night, possibly looking through the window, they talked on Dateline about him going into the park and the hiking trail as the sun is going down. He's going by himself up into the forest to do God knows what. And you really get the sense of this trait that is captured in the Hare psychopathy checklist, this fearlessness quality, where people who are of a psychopathic type, and we don't know that here, but people who have those traits, and we know Kohberger was Googling about sociopathy and psychopathy, have this incredible way of just sort of being cool and unaffected under circumstances that would make most of us afraid. And it is really remarkable because you're talking about a few minutes. He even paused and sat on the chair in the room where Ethan is, and the whole thing just takes a few minutes, and there's virtually no blood left. Evidence left, and so the whole thing is rather disturbing. Did you guys also have that sense that, despite the chaos, he must have been remarkably able to do what he went in there to do, right?
Well, if their timeline was correct, with the vehicle turning and approaching the house at 4:07, and it's peeling out of there at 4:20, and that means that we've got 13 minutes that he's on the scene. And I think Greg maybe mentioned in the Dateline show that it's exhausting. I don't think between the adrenaline and the work there. So I think that does explain why at that point he sits down for a minute, trying to catch, because this thing is unfolded very quickly. And I think if he did go in there, if we kind of follow the thought we've all had of his behavior, and it was intentional, maybe to go in there and to sexually assault and to do that, what threw this kind of in a different realm is all of a sudden he goes into a room where he's playing. He's not worried about any other people being in the house. He knows they're probably going to be in the house, but he goes in there, and what he wasn't anticipating maybe was two people being in the room, which then throws this thing quickly, into overdrive. And the other thought I had was, we keep talking about, I think Greg has said that, he thought that he's been in the home before. I found it interesting, the video they showed, that the police went to that house on more than one occasion due to noise issues. But did you notice the one, I think it was the second video that they showed there, that they showed up, but nobody who lived in the house,
right, the girls weren't there
in the house. They ended up calling, I think, Maddie by phone to talk to her. So, whereas I think some people want to say, well, the girls wouldn't have let anybody different in there. But if people have access to that house and people are going in and through that, who knows? He may have been part of one of those groups that wandered in there at some point as well.
Yeah. Anne, what do you
Interesting
think?
point.
Yeah, I've always thought that he'd been in that house before. That was known as a party house, so that it wouldn't look out of place for him to be kind of wandering around, getting comfortable, if you will, because he had to have known about the various rooms and so forth. So that was always my thought, that he had been there before in the rooms, and maybe just one time.
Interesting. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? And because I want to move on to the.
I'll just add that it makes him different than Bundy. If you have him studying Bundy, a lot of Bundy's homicides were much more impulsive. You would happen to chance across a woman who fit the kind of prototype in your mind of what you were looking for. You would lure her, and if you couldn't secure that victim, you would quickly move on to someone else. At Lake Sam, they reconstructed that he stopped women every 15 minutes until he was able to secure 2 victims, at Naslin and Ott. And what is in common with Bundy there is the peeping that may have preceded and all of that, but it doesn't have that impulse quality. And I think it's because with Bundy, he was charming enough to talk to a victim and lure them. And this is the kind of guy that wouldn't have been able to do that. So he would have needed to study you like an amoeba in a petri dish and think that he was going to connect with you in that way, where there was no social interaction at all. And it's reminiscent of discussions that people like Ken Lanning have had between the differences between adequate and inadequate personalities when it comes to taking children. But there's the groomer type that has more the alien charmer personality, and this type. And so I think that's very different. Like he wishes he was Bundy. Yeah.
Well, those are great points, and I just want to just push back just a little bit for the audience.
Yeah, tell me.
The idea of, was he picking up where Bundy left off in the sorority house?
The Chi Omega house in Florida.
Right. I mean, if Bryan Kohberger's the guy, why the sorority, all the pictures of the sorority girls on his phone, why pick a house with sorority girl type? I mean, what's going on there with that piece of this puzzle? I mean, because I think we've talked, and I've had the thought process of that. Yes, Maddie was his primary target, but the house was his target. I mean, he knew there were 5 or 6 girls in that house. He had to have. I mean, am I off base there? Keep me honest.
Yeah, the only thought that I would have to add to that is that, let's see, the Chi Omega house, but his last victim was Kimberly Leach, correct? Little 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, which doesn't fit the role of a co-ed, or what his preferred type of victim was, meaning Bundy.
Well, there wasn't. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say there was a victim that Bundy encountered, and she survived, got away. She's written about that. I'd have to go back and get it, but that sounds a little bit like what happened to him going back out. You're assuming that he runs into the one of the other, well, not a victim, but the one that identified or said that she ran into him.
Yeah.
And I've seen that as now that we know that he's so interested in Bundy, I want to go back and go over that. Bundy's last victim. He left several victims, actually. He didn't go in their rooms, but it was in the room.
Just as an exercise, let's say we were to take, we just do a quick opinion exercise where we took 2 columns, Bundy's behavior, Kohberger's behavior. Do we see a lot of crossover here? One, we know he was studying, Bundy, right? I mean, it came out on the show that the one PhD who was writing about the feelings, explain that a little bit more for the audience. And by the way, we got almost 6,000 people here right now. Gary?
You want me to do that quick?
Yeah.
Well, what it looks like is that he downloads a paper about Bundy's experience and so forth, and then, according to the Dateline program, he winds up in this kind of dynamic with the person who wrote it, where he's essentially condescending to her about her grammar and how she writes as if he could do it better. I almost wondered if it's because she was insulting Bundy, perhaps in some way that she describes him or talks about him. But I think he felt that he belonged in the role that Professor was in, right? Because he always had to be the smartest person in the room. It's a female writing about Bundy and all that. But the idea is he seems to want to get into the mind of Bundy. And what's the sense I have is that where I think there might have been a little bit of an identification with Bundy beyond wishing that he was slick and chameleon-like socially, when in fact he was odd and peculiar, is that I think Bundy had this kind of compartmentalized quality where he was sort of, dark Ted by night, and kind, innocuous Ted by day. And I think we had someone who was sort of living a double life like that, who, is in school and studying criminology and all that, just as Bundy did, and then has this other world and this longing to connect, with who he really is and show people and having to keep it hidden. And I think that aspect of Bundy would have been very interesting to somebody of that type. And I think you have that same quality that he might have identified with, that if the world had sort of been different to him, he might have gone a pro-social route and helped people. And remember, one of the things he's Googling we saw on Dateline is something like, can a sociopathic person seem pro-social, or something like that, right? As I think that idea is fascinating, that you have somebody who might have had a sense of, I'm fragmenting. And we saw also in his writings online, when he talks about his own mental health, that he says that it was bothering him that he was able to not feel anything towards other people, that he could look at a person. He actually says that he could look at a person and see them as meat, if I remember the phrasing. And so I think he's starting to say, here I am, trying to connect to people, and I'm smart and I'm capable, this, that, and the other thing. But there's another part of me that really hates these people and could see them as objects. And I wonder what was going on in the minds of these offenders. And I'll also add, Chris, a fascinating piece of information we just got that wasn't on the Dateline episode that I saw, where Steve Gonzalez, who we spoke to on this show, was talking to Ashley Banfield. And he says that he gets in the mail this message from somebody who wants to talk to him. And he was an offender, supposedly, who had been studied by Kohberger. And he says that Kohberger was getting off, that was the phrase, getting off, hearing him talk about burglarizing, if I remember correctly. Now imagine this thing. And that's very reminiscent of Bundy on the helpline, listening to people talk about, remember when Bundy worked next to Ann Booth on the helpline, and people are,
can you imagine getting Ted
Yeah,
Bundy on the other end? Hi, I want to kill myself, and him go ahead, click, you hang up.
Well, but it's fascinating because it makes you wonder what the real purpose was of it, and the internal process that somebody's experiencing. I mean, do these people, on one hand, really want to be prosocial? Is it an intel collecting? Is it arousing on some? Listen to people talk about wanting to destroy themselves. I have no idea. I only know that I think the paper suggests that he's battling inside and being fascinated by this notion of fragmentation and this increasing identification with somebody who really came to despise women. I mean, I think that's the essence of the identification with Bundy, is this utter misogyny, like women are a giant mess. And they're all, you kind of hate them. So, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think about?
Except for some of them.
What do you think about the idea that, we're talking about his fantasy life and fantasizing and fantasizing about women and all that was going on there. But it seems to me like there's a fantasy here that he has of becoming something other than who he really was. Because he describes himself as a sickly, tired, useless, stupid man. And he writes that and says that's who he is. And now he's looking for new role models and new people. And I mean, he goes through a pretty drastic shift in how he looks. I mean, he goes from, so they said he lost 100 pounds, quit heroin. He's making this major change. So he's really looking for a new role model. And at the same time, he's studying criminology. So he is going to be exposed in that context to some of these people. And I think one of the things that I've found fascinating about Ted Bundy is, people who knew him, apart from the crime side of life, talked about him as being somebody that they would engage with, right? That he was personable. He was a nice guy. He had that reputation. And I think one of you said earlier that, Bundy kind of had these two lives, the day life and the nightlife. And so this is a perfect model for his fantasy of becoming something new. And so he's out there, and it almost feels like after the fact, his post behavior, he's going out and doing research to see how well he's doing. Am I measuring up to my fantasy here, looking at more and more information on Bundy to see where he is with that. Yeah. Photograph of him, similar things. Seems that all fits within kind of, you have the sexual fantasy.
You got to admit, that's a creepy photograph.
Yeah. Well, and so is the one of him in the hoodie.
Well, we'll get there too. But Greg, what were you going to say? And then Dr. Ann?
I think that he looks to Bundy from, he aspires to be something more than he is in terms of Bundy's strengths. I think the motivation for these crimes are different between Bundy and somebody like this particular crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, we see what he's like in reality. Mm-hmm. He's terrible to the young women, his teaching assistants, and to even, I guess, some faculty that they have to admonish him and find out what's going on. So he's a 180 to Bundy.
Yeah.
It's interesting that this photo surfaces, post homicide that morning at 10:30 a.m. after the homicide.
Yeah.
This, the one on the left photos. And then of course, Gary, as you caught this one, Bundy at the court, put his thumb up. And now he watches a Bundy, according to, the most recent information, he watches a documentary on Bundy. And as Gary would say, he cosplays Bundy. Right? I mean, this just can't be, off the wall, right? I mean, am I in?
Well, I think, Chris, this is the photo that he does at the same time he downloads the Britney Spears song "Criminal."
Right.
And I have to tell you that part of me wonders if at that moment he might not have been thinking about posting this selfie on social media with that song playing as a way of flirting with the idea of, look at me now. Now I'm dark, sexy Bryan, that has done this violent thing, and perhaps had the judgment to not do so. But it does feel like this was a way of flirting with showing the world, bridging the gap and kind of saying, this is who I am really when you think I'm a loser. That kind of this Grim Reaper kind of look that he's got going on here. And I think to a point that Greg made that was extremely important in the Dateline show was that we have to view what happened at the school as a kind of precipitating event. Because if he's using the teaching assistant thing to insult women and control them and condescend to them, and then they report him, and he's told that he may lose that job, it's like a back and forth of power, where he's saying, you're going to take that power away from me? and then you strike back, so that it's this kind of feeling of no way, like now I'm leveling the playing field. That's it. And of course, the part that we don't seem to be saying out loud, and Dateline didn't seem to say out loud either, is this is a common behavior in people who become serial killers. This is not, I mean, for some reason it's not being said out loud, is that, he seems to be someone that would have fallen into that roughly 12% that we found in the Columbia Mass Murder Database, who commit a mass murder and then go on to kill again. Because the themes of this were so serial killer like. And is that an impression that we all share, that it just doesn't feel like a one-time situation? I mean, Greg, Ann, Chris, Dean, anyone. Does it feel more serial killer like?
Yeah, to begin with, it manifests some characteristics of it. what attracted my attention that further supports that, Gary, to me, is this thing between MO versus signature. And there's that behavior that he engages in before he leaves the crime scene. And that is for what I would consider as signature behavior. That is, without seeing the photographs, whoever this individual is, he carves up the calves of the male victim. Don't know why. We haven't seen it. We don't know if there's some symbolism behind it. We can talk about the potential theories, but to me, serial killers, we often say if an individual kills two or more with a resting off period in between, if that's a basic kind of a definition. Well, I think if you have one event similar to this, well, let's look at this one, with a signature aspect to the crime that appears not to have any rational, reasonable explanation for it, but more of the projection of the personality, which you would have a better understanding, more of the projection of the personality of the offender into the crime scene, focused on this male victim, and a male victim that he didn't fight. He didn't have to fight with this guy. This guy was out of it from the beginning. There was no interaction whatsoever. So he engages in that behavior, signature, that behavior which is unnecessary, right, to commit the crime successfully. And certainly I think that from my definition of it and the way I understand it, in my experience, falls into that category. And if that's the case, then looking at 4 victims with a signature aspect, even though technically you could say it's a mass, or it's a mass killing, right? Because you've got more than 2 in one location, or 3. But with that signature is suggestive of, we've got now a budding serial killer, or an individual that has a characteristic of a serial killer, and therefore we would expect to see more crimes by this individual. This is not a one and off type of crime.
Right. Well, and also the fact that there's violent pornography would be very unusual for a mass murderer.
And we have
when
to
we
be
did
very
the
careful
database,
with guidelines on what type of violent P, because they'll hammer us on guidelines.
Oh, I see. I'll say P. Yes. I'll say violent P. And so the idea is that we don't usually see that. We found that to be extremely rare in the large study we did of mass murderers, except for that roughly 12 on to commit serial killing. For example, Dennis Rader, who commits a mass murder and then proceeds from the Oteros to commit more traditional serial killing with cooling off periods that were quite long. So that I think it is really interesting to think about how you have clearly fantasy. I mean, don't forget, the blade is bought 7 months before the killings. It's as if you buy it and then you go out and you decide who you're going to use it on. So the fantasy is there, and the P that was being watched had themes that were extraordinarily disturbing. People that were forced, people that were sleeping. I have to tell you something that was not said on Dateline, that it was not used, that I had said that disturbed me immediately, is that Bundy was a necrophile, and sleeping women and watching P with that theme is interesting. I think it's about domination and control and all that, but it is interesting to think about the idea of people asleep, looking dead. And so there is that quality of the disturbing fantasy world that seems to have been there, and the motive is not very mass murderer like. Mass murderers on the whole are basically people who lack coping skills in the face of life events and snap. They're much more impulsive. There is a subtype of them that methodically plots, but they don't tend to commit SA mixed in there and all of that, or even think about doing it. So I think the motives are much more traditional, and there are behaviors in this individual that were suggested by Dateline that feel very serial killer-like. One of the most classic was the story they told of the Korean woman who apparently wanted a romantic relationship with him, and what she thinks is that perhaps he took things so that then she would install a camera that could be watched from the phone, and she wondered if he wasn't watching
Well,
in the house. I mean, I think we'd all agree
well, we
that
also
sounds
have
like
Dylan, the witness Dylan, report that she thought he left with something in his hands. Remember, don't forget that.
Oh yes,
That
that's true.
that's in the documents.
Yes.
And,
Well,
and
Anne called it on your show, Chris. Anne said they should do an inventory. In fact, she said that before they even caught him. They caught this suspect. She said they should do an inventory because this person is going to take something.
this panel has said so many things before they caught him. I'm going to put a gold star in everybody's little
Yeah.
pocket here. But I am
But Anne, you did say that. Yeah.
right. I don't want to get too far down the lane because I want to go back to the point that Greg was talking about with signature. We don't know if the carving, and I want to just ask the group if it's post-mortem. If it's post-mortem, does that make a difference to the group? Greg? Ann?
Well, I think it is from the explanation discussion that we've had and explanation that's been given to us. There was no interaction between he and the male victim.
Because he's reported sitting down and there's blood transfer on a chair, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and then
But
the
that
carving.
male victim, the male victim is still in bed. So there's never been an effort to engage or defend. My understanding is that there is just one fatal wound to the male victim.
Right, they report to the chest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
An artery is cut.
And if that carving activity occurred before that happened, there'd be a lot of movement going on. So I think that happened afterwards.
I agree.
Yeah. When
Well,
So what does that
least
tell us
resistance.
in experience? I mean, now we're going to really bring your experience level to the table here. If he's moving towards a signature aspect in his head, and this is a postmortem mark or something to that effect, I think what some of the public will know, but a lot of them won't. Just so you do know, folks that are listening, if it's postmortem, the wound is not going to bleed. Okay? It will because the heart's not beating. And so that wound will look different than any other wound on the body. If that wound occurred while the heart was still beating, then you're going to know, yes, this was part of the initial attack. But if there's after effect, which Greg is talking about signature, and it's an after mark, then the heart stopped and that individual's deceased. And I know we have to be sensitive because we're talking about Ethan, but we're also talking about the savagery of if in fact that's how it went down. He was on his way because he had already climbed the mountain. Are you guys tracking where I'm going there? Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. So What's he doing sitting down? Is he taking it in?
He's decombusting. No, I think he's trying to relax. He knows. I think there were some things that occurred that he was not anticipating.
Right.
And he's exhausted. And there are things that are going through his thought process of what has just happened and how, in the moment, how he feels about what's happened, and this level of power and control and domination that he's experienced with this experience, and what it has done for his, whomever this person is, what it has done for his self-esteem and confidence. And then he realizes also he's got to get out of there. And when he's able to reorganize himself, in a sense, he moves to leave. And then we know what happens following that. But when you take a look at how the crimes were committed, and presuming that whomever this was is the individual in the vehicle that speeds out of the neighborhood, he's in a hurry. He's anxious. And to some degree, there's, I think, a level of panic, which would be natural for this individual, because they're successful, but they've sensed this immediate emotion of victory that he wasn't expecting, and he feels even better about what's happened than had he just been successful with his initial target.
Relevance and target location, postmortem, i.e. the legs.
You mean from an interpretation perspective?
Yeah.
Well, Gary, this is your area. I don't, we wouldn't even know for sure if, honestly, without talking to the individual responsible, he may not even know why, but that it wasn't necessary for the purpose and rational purpose of successfully committing the crime.
Well, I think that if we imagine that this whole thing was a fantasy, which was sex fueled, you can imagine how he would have felt towards a male daring to be present in the scene, and that there would have been a special fury toward that male, a symbol of a man that had a significant other and was staying over and sharing intimacy and all of that. I think there would have been a mixture of envy and extreme anger towards that individual, and it almost seems that he sort of loses it a little bit. The male evokes something a little extra. And what's also interesting is that, as we had said, he was so methodical even under pressure, but then suddenly deteriorates on his running out the door and gets scared and almost runs someone over, leaves two victims, the whole thing. It reminds me a great deal of the description that Bundy gave when he was interviewed, I think by Keppel. He gave a description of having killed Georgianne Hawkins, and then realizing that he left one of her shoes in the parking lot where he picked her up. And then he suddenly erupts into a frantic, anxious state and gets on a bicycle and rides into the parking lot to find the shoe, does it right under the nose of the police, by the way, who are searching for her, and then takes all of her stuff that he's got in the car and is driving along the highway, opens up the window and is just tossing everything out as he's driving down the highway, and then goes back to that kind of state of being cool-headed. And so, I mean, I think it's important to understand that he didn't lose his insight that this was high risk. I mean, he developed, I think, a kind of, he was getting into it with the last victim and then sort of realized, what the heck am I doing? I better get out of Dodge. But I also think there was an experimentation quality. This is a scientifically minded guy. Anyone who knew him intimately would say, yeah, he was a control freak. He was a little misogynistic, condescending, but he's an experimenter. He's intellectually stimulated by learning and so forth. And I hate to say it, but I think that the carving of the legs, if he had been not captured, I think we would have seen an increasing experimentation with what could be done to a victim with a
Dr.
blade.
Ham, thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this where, Gary, is this where you wondered about Berkowitz? Because Berkowitz would target males and, a couple.
Exactly. And because with Berkowitz, there wasn't an overt sexual quality, but everything he did around setting a fire and watching
Right.
the police descend on it would cause arousal, things like
Right.
that. And so there's a sort of detached, inadequate quality. And he was mad at the men too, because they
Yeah.
were in the way of the fantasy. So, but I wonder, and do you see, because remember we did the paper with Dr. Petrecka on mutilation and dismemberment. Do you see an experimentation flavor a little bit to the carving?
Oh, on the carving, yeah, because the Jean Joubert case, that was what he did. He made those carvings on the chest of the boys because he was kind of curious about what was inside. So that could have been, was it just markings? Did it write anything? Was he trying to write something on the leg or just slashes?
Just
Yeah.
little marks, as I understand it, and we weren't told. But they were totally unnecessary, and
Right.
and I think I can only envision that it had something to do with the male getting in the way, losing it a little bit, and then getting experimental on the way out the door.
Right.
But those experimenters they don't tend to be the Ted Bundy types. They're more the
No.
Kemper types that are
No.
weird and little schizoid, autistic kind of quality. Yeah.
Yeah, Greg, you remember the Jean Joubert case?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's what that reminded me of. The other thought I had is that he does 4, and Bundy only, is he thinking in his mind, well, Bundy only did 1, I did 4. I've got it over Bundy. Could be part of the grandiosity, if you will.
Sure.
Okay, so now I'm going to throw a curveball to the group here. I've been holding something that just occurred to me. I've been thinking, why is this K-bar knife in play for him? Right? I mean, he was the guy that loved paramilitary concepts, i.e., wanted to be the police cadet, so he wanted to get into something. Okay. And then it occurred to me the picture that was out there that's been cut off by everybody, but I want to show it tonight and get your impression real fast. How about that?
Oh.
This is at a wedding. 2017. He's on the build-up, and one of his buddies there is in the Army.
What's he got on his side?
Well, I can't. No, that's a reflection. That's a light.
Oh, okay.
But his friend in the military. Okay, it got me thinking. Well, wait a minute. Is this kind of what started kicking off that thought process? Do you know what I mean? I know it's a leap. Admittedly, it's a leap, but you guys know, and we all know in our experience, it's never by accident. There is always a dot that's going to be connected going back, somewhere, right? And this is the girl that's cut off, that I cut off to the left. Her brother went to high school with him and said that Kohberger was a bully, that he used to bully everybody and that he hated him. And she reported it to the news, and that's where this photograph came from. But everybody has cut off the military uniform. And I find it odd. Now, mind you, he's not in the Marine Corps, but he is in the Army, and they both use K-bar knives. So I've been curious, what in the world brought this K-bar knife into the mix? So looking at this, what are you guys thinking? No wrong answer, right? This is what we did before, and I'm going to show that here in a minute, of where we started just thinking about things.
And how long?
I think
how long?
Oh,
How
please.
long? I'm sorry. How long before the
No,
homicide does this take
This
place?
was 2017, so it's 5 years.
Okay.
5 years before. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, weapon is important. It's
How
symbolic.
long was this
Yeah.
before his transformation? I mean, this 7, so that means that the big transformation where he lost all the weight.
Well, this is it. This is where he's at. He's in that circle.
So,
So he's been, he graduated high school, and then is when he had that 2-year break, right?
Yep. And
You're
this is
saying-
where he puts his life back together, gets invited to a wedding. And the girl at the opposite end, her brother hates Kohberger.
Cover, yeah.
So why is he
I-
invited if
That's a
if
great
he has
question.
these relationships with these folks? Negative relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Good question.
Okay. Well, it's something to chew on
Yeah.
as we go forward. But I thought it was curious that that picture's been there, and that the K-bar, was the weapon of choice. So I now want to go. I wanna-
It sounds an awful lot like Kohberger, doesn't it? K-bar. But that always fascinated me. That sounds like his name. But I think that Kohberger is somebody who would be very drawn to things that were regimented and mechanical, the very obsessional quality, the kind of offender, if he's guilty, who would have an admiration for cops and security guards and people in the military and so forth because of the regimented, controlled behavior. And I could see him admiring people that had it all together like that. Because the whole thing is, when you put that uniform on, in a way, it compensates for any inadequacy in yourself, because you're identifying with the power that you emblematize with the shield or the sword or the weapon, the gun, whatever. It's like what they call in psychology basking in glory, basking in the glory of a group that you're identifying with. So I could see him being a person who would be very drawn to that and finding that very attractive. And there is a military-ish quality even to the outfit that he puts on when he goes in there. With the mask and he was wearing a balaclava. He wore a mask, right, over his face with the bushy eyebrows showing, and the sheath and the whole thing. I really, like we said from the beginning, we picture this guy going in like it was D-Day, like a mission. There's a whole outfit and everything for it. And I'm sure we could all think of offenders who had that, who were like wannabe cops, who wanted to work with law enforcement and all that. In fact, we know he did. He did want to work with
he
law
tried.
enforcement.
Yeah, he tried.
Yeah, so he was drawn,
Good.
and it's fascinating to imagine him with the cosplay, with the costumes. You really picture this guy like dressing up as more powerful people and fantasizing about it. Look at me, I've got the hood. I'm waiting for photos to circle where he's got the outfit on that he wore into if it's him, that he wore to go in that night.
Well, I think it's interesting to watch, social media. I mean, people are saying that, when did he take this photograph? Okay. I mean, how old is it? And DNA evidence is only circumstantial evidence. I mean, what? I mean, we died for DNA evidence, remember, back in the day, because it used to be blood type, A, B, O. Okay, that's what you had at the crime scene. That was it. We didn't have DNA. And today it's circumstantial evidence. Somehow his DNA got on the sheath and, as Gary says, flew itself through the walls onto the bed of
Right, while it was at the park
victim
star.
upstairs. Okay, so I want to go to December 21st, 2022. You guys doing okay so far? Or an hour and a half? I don't want to keep it too, forever, but I do want the audience to see everybody weighed in on December 21st, 2022. And our question was, can we get into the mind of this guy? And this was the result.
But that having been said, I think it's important to point out that what we're dealing with here, by any definition, whether it be the FBI crime classification manual definition or the less conservative definition one sees in the literature on mass murder, we're dealing with a mass murderer here. This is somebody who killed 4 victims at one time in one location. We have no reason to believe yet that this is somebody who went on to kill again, killed in close proximity in time to the offense, killed before with any kind of cooling off period. Now, I can tell you, I was the lead author on, along with Dr. Raghi Burgess, we co-created the Columbia Mass Murder Database during my time at Columbia Medical Center. That's, to my knowledge, the largest study done to date of mass murder worldwide. And I think it gives a little bit of information.
Gary, you have a headache?
No, I got a headache listening to myself.
Yeah. You're good.
That might be helpful here. What we found is that what really matters is the weapon. And the fact that we're dealing with a mass murder that involved something other than a gun is very critical. So turns out from that very large data set that when we're looking at the use of a weapon other than a gun, the likelihood that we're dealing with somebody who has some odd characteristics that might be considered to be on the spectrum of being authentically disturbed.
Okay. That's the point that I don't think you realize you said. That he's on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And now there's evidence that they're trying to get into the trial that he's autistic. So I want to go deeper into your head tonight, Gary, even though you're rubbing it, my dear friend. Okay. Trust me, we rub our heads too when you talk sometimes. I mean,
Yes,
this is what friends
I
are
don't
for.
blame you.
That's
I had a full head of hair when I met Gary.
Yeah, right. He rubbed it right off. Trichotillomania pulled it right. I think, let me just be clear that I think it's extremely important to let the mental health professionals assessing him kind of say for sure what's going on with him, because I don't think it's right for me to opine on whether he is or isn't on the spectrum. But I will say this, autistic people who are a focus of my clinical work are generally among the most harmless people ever. They tend to be very moralistic and not the type of people who would even be interested in doing such a thing. And but about 50% of serial killers have what might be called schizoid autistic traits, which have a kind of detached, obsessional, mechanical quality that, when coinciding with psychopathy and sexual perversion, can give someone the ability to do horrible things with the detachment that a scientist might have when dissecting a frog. So that what we see in those offenses is not a sexual excitement and so forth, as much as experimentation, a scientific interest, being stimulated by torture or playing things out, extending the. And what I think is what I was picturing, and I think I go on to say is that this is somebody who would live a very mechanical, rote existence, and who would have a temper, and because if you sort of rocked him out of that, I would imagine somebody who would pop and hold a grudge and be really mad that you took him out of that control. And people like that who live those regimented lives, you get them in the regimented mode, and you could say, wow, what a scholarly person, what an intelligent guy. He's really got his life in order. He's really going places. And then you see them when they lose control, and they could be really quite terrifying. And so that's how I was picturing. But I think with regard to the spectrum, let's just say it alone, in and of itself, would not explain committing a mass murder. It would have to be in conjunction with something else, like a paraphilic disorder where you're sexually aroused by some or by some inappropriate party, or a psychopathy or something else. it's interesting that the word psychopathy is not allowed in the courtroom here in this case, and it's interesting also that there's no personality testing. I wondered, by the way, if somebody identifying with Bundy might be annoyed about that. Remember Bundy's famous personality testing that he did when he was arrested in Utah, which I'm sure was studied by this guy. That was Al Carlisle. Remember the whole thing of Al Carlisle out in Utah in the prison doing the assessment of him? Well, I could imagine him being upset that he's not going to get personality testing. That'll be left for the ages to study, that kind of thing. But but I really do think that the spectrum-y quality that may or may not have been there. Certainly an obsessional guy, a mechanical guy, no question about it. But let's just say I could see it being used to mitigate, in the sense of like take the death penalty off the table because of Atkins, right? That if he was on the spectrum, he couldn't be executed. And I think it preempts that people in the courtroom are going to see him behaving in a weird way. I mean, can you imagine if, for example, during the trial, somebody says something that is not true or that he feels takes him out of his comfort zone? He may pop or call out of his seat, and try to correct the person or condescend or who knows. And I think it's a way of saying, no, everybody, like we've equipped you with the knowledge that he meets criteria for the spectrum. So that's all you're seeing. But I think the antics in the courtroom might be very interesting for somebody who has such a hard time controlling the impulse to be right and be the smartest guy in the room. So that's where I think you're going to see this stuff that's being picked up by that category.
Okay, so in your opinion, is it a plus or a minus for the defense to play that card?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's very useful if what they're going for is to take the death penalty off the table. It could certainly be a plus. But what I think is a minus for them is that it seems to be applying a label to the ignorance of all the other things that are there that you don't see in autism. It's like, how are you explaining everything else? That's the whole problem. It's like the elephant in the room. Now you have a situation where Dateline has revealed somebody looking up violent P on the internet,
Right.
what looks like a period of a gestating fantasy. There's a sexualized component with the images that he's looking at of women, seems to be trolling, the whole thing. That's not autistic behavior. And so I think now it starts to become, and to be perfectly frank, I think it might even be viewed as an insult to autistics, to sort of cluster in the idea that somebody could do those things because they are autistic. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I think it's a plus with regard to the death penalty, definitely, and the behavior in the courtroom to the defense.
Any other thoughts?
I think it's really important to overcome that kind of a thing, Gary. I would think it would be important to identify pre-incident behavior, the behavior at the crime scene, and the behavior after the crime, what he engaged in order to avoid detection, etc. And all those things and behaviors that he engaged in from the very beginning. If this was the individual, the purchase of the knife, the purchase of the ski mask, we know that he was in the area at least 24 times, etc. All those things suggest that this is a progressive move. It's a progressive developmental preparation stage before he goes out and commits the crime. And it's one who does control very much what they're doing and preparing for it and preparing to be successful. It has very much control over the targeting, the preparatory phase, and what they're going to do to avoid detection, etc.
Interesting, Dr. Ann. Anything before we move on here to questions, Q&A? We've got a ton of Q&A.
Yeah, I was ready for that. The Q&A.
Okay.
I want to see what the audience is thinking.
Yeah, everybody, I haven't forgot about your questions. We've just, we're going to go here. Some comments.
Chris, I was looking back at other podcasts and things that were done around the same time. We all got together and presented that picture of what we thought was going on before arrest.
Mhm.
And there were people saying things like it was a member of the family of one of the victims. It was just, it was this other guy that sort of knew them, who had a grudge, and someone else. And I think it's very easy to miss that we picked up right away that this was a very offense. And it is impressive to go back and watch. I mean, this panel. Greg, Ann, Dean, Chris.
Do you
the
think he
things
was watching
that
us,
you
Gary?
said were extraordinary, huh?
Do you think he was
Yes,
watching
I
us?
absolutely think he was watching us. Yes, I do.
I wish he would take
Because we learned on Dateline that he was watching something like 60 programs and took images of the
Yeah.
shows. And remember, Chris, that when we did that episode, somebody in the audience wrote in and said he will be arrested in Pennsylvania.
I remember that.
And we never figured out how somebody could know that.
I clipped it.
I have always thought it was him.
So Maui Girl says thoughts on his mood after he left and next day.
Celebration, victory.
Yeah.
Glorification of himself. I think for those next few days, he feels very, very much in control. And his self-esteem and self-confidence, and that in those moments, are very high.
Interesting. Anybody
Well,
else?
Well, Chris,
Hear-
we learned from Dateline, he called home.
Yeah, I was going to say it'd be interesting to hear what the conversation with the people he talked to at home were like. That would be some
Imagine you
interesting conversations.
killing 4 people and calling mom and dad and then taking a selfie. I mean, that's what's said in the timeline.
Yeah.
And for a long time, too. A long chat. I mean,
I
is
think
he
the longest
cleaning
one
up
was
at the same
56
time he's talking? Yeah. What'd you say, Dean?
I said the longest call, I believe, was something like 56 minutes long. Another one was like almost 30. So
You'd like
Quite
you'd
remarkable.
like to know his behavior in school before and after. That would tell you something. Did he get into more antagonistic kinds of things? It looks like with the TAs, the women, young women, and I think he gets flunks out, doesn't he? Or not flunks out, but he loses his scholarship. Am I wrong in that, or am I right?
He was told
I'm
he
not
was at
sure.
risk of losing the position,
Oh,
I
yes.
believe.
Yeah, they put him on a
Okay.
let's talk about this plan,
Yeah.
concept, right? As a TA.
I
Great.
spent some time there in the early days following it as well, kind of going back through in his mind, checking things. So one of the things that he does is he changes his plates to Washington. Looks like he was looking at some of his online profiles and looking at deleting some of those. He's back out looking at K-bar knives. So another speculation which way that was going on, reloading for another case.
Right.
Or did he realize he had left something behind and he was trying to come up with a way to cover for it? But anyway, I think there was some reflective time. I agree with Greg. I think he was on a high, but he also was processing back through and reevaluating and trying to make sure he's plugging holes. And I think, at least on Dateline, and I don't know what the source of this was, but it seemed to me like the day after or 2 days after, he goes back by the scene. Am I correct on that?
The day after
The
9/11.
So that's something that we see.
Actually, the day of.
Yeah.
So
so
at the
later
4
in
a.m.
the day,
like,
he goes back over there and drives by, which, is one of the things that we look for sometimes in offenders returning to the scene. So
so do you think the defendant will plead or want to go to jail? JoJo's asking.
Go to trial.
You think he'll go to trial, Greg?
I think that's what they're asking: plea or go to trial.
Yeah, sorry.
I think he's got nothing to lose, but I think he'll at least begin the trial. And if it, depending on what not just the defense attorneys, but I think there's a member, at least one member of the family that's going to have a lot of influence on him and about what his ultimate decision is going to be.
So Sunshine and Tan Lines, love that name. Hi, do any of you think he has done this before? I don't think he's done it before.
I'd say probably not.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree, although I would have, no, who was, I'm sorry.
I said, I think he probably
Anyone?
fantasized it, but I don't think that he's done it.
Yeah.
Fantasy wise.
Right, and that gets right to the question of when did he start fantasizing about it? I suspect back in Pennsylvania, because I think that you have somebody studying criminology because he's probably thinking about this for some time, we don't know, but it's hard to believe that the thought was hatched only after moving out to Bundy country out there in Washington. But I think perhaps it boiled down to not having the nerve or the opportunity, or perhaps there wasn't a life event that was stressful enough or something. But it's really hard to believe, because we know from offenders, I mean, if he did this and he is serial killer like, he was right on time for the average age at which you do it the first time. But the thinking about it goes back years. And you don't develop a fixation on that kind of pee overnight. That's the whole thing. Where does that start? How does that fuel things? And I wondered about that also as an identification with Bundy, because in Bundy's interviews, he claims that pee was the primary thing that sucked him into that stuff. And I can't help but think that this obsessional, fantasy-oriented guy is in a world of doing a lot of that and finding himself aroused by it and identifying with that being sucked into that darkness. My understanding is he came from a home where that would have been considered really immoral, and had a sense of fragmentation himself over probably even normal impulse of that type, although that's unclear. I also think that the parent dynamics are going to get really interesting as we start to understand, who are these women in the mind of this person, and what is the prototype of woman? Where does that come from? I mean, do you have a mother that's very protective? Do you have a mother that adores you? Do you have a mother who says no one else is going to love you? Are you a kind of developmentally odd person and your mother is super protective of you, and you go out in the world and discover you're weird? We don't know, but one thing that is very interesting is that Kohberger's mother wrote to the papers to reflect upset about the execution of Bundy. We all seem to forget that. Remember that article where she wrote like a letter to the editor about how ghoulish it was to be happy that Bundy was executed and all that. That's very interesting to wonder, is that floating around in the back of this guy's head about mom? I also thought about the mother with the officer that stops him where he goes into the crosswalk and he's condescending to her. I thought about the story that he seems to almost ask the person who's arresting him out for coffee. That whole thing. It's like you get the sense that when a female is talking to him and she's got power, that he sort of hates her but gets aroused. It's like a weird kind of mixture of, I don't know if I want to destroy you, I want to ask you out at the same time, and I can't help but wonder about the roots at home of that dynamic. Where do you get that idea from, that women are divided up like that into those ideal? Remember the woman that he goes on the date and he tells her she's got terrific birthing hips? So there's like the mom and then the victim type that you have respect for. So it's interesting to think about that. I think that's going to unravel as time goes on.
Let's answer this real fast. So Jojo, if you're implying that you have firsthand knowledge that Maddie used to wear these rings, I want to make a quick suggestion that you call the authorities if in fact you're seeing this observation, because this is a significant concept that you're presenting here, that if Maddie wore rings and he was seen with a ring, that you're right. Is this a trophy play? And so if in fact you know that for sure, then I would feel more comfortable that you reach out to Moscow PD and present, the facts as you have them, so that they can chase that down. I hope that helps. And I know I didn't answer the question, but if in fact he did take a trophy, then yeah, that's very consistent of what we've been talking about here, of his stage of development. We'll just, I hope that helps, and please don't be offended that I'm not going to completely dive in here because I don't know. But I'm going to go look at that photograph for sure that you've brought up here, for sure, because this is a significant. It is equal to, and Greg, keep me honest here, it's equal to the experimentation / signature with Ethan, if in fact this is reality.
Yeah, absolutely. But we don't know. We would expect it. Certainly would expect it, as we suggested in the earlier shows. We expected a lot of this behavior that we've subsequently found out to be accurate. I find it interesting on the themes of the P that we've talked about. That those perversions are all about power, domination, and control. It has nothing to do with, how do you get a date? How do you romance a woman? What impresses a woman? What behavior impresses a woman? It's just the opposite of that. There's no interest whatsoever to have a legitimate relationship with a female. It's just the opposite.
The P information, the inappropriate information they found on his phone, allegedly, is pretty sadistic, right?
Yeah.
And
but even the themes, the themes of it, it's very sadistic and very controlling, very dominating. And it shows you where the thought process is and the level of, what level, at this point anyway in time, does he have an interest? Is it legitimate interest to develop a legitimate relationship with somebody? No. Somewhere along the line, that's been discarded, and he's focused on something completely different.
Fascinating. Whoever wants to take this, does BK believe he will not be convicted? KDV. What do you think? Dean, we haven't heard much from you. You're like E.F. Hutton. You sit in the background. You're like me. Only I have to use
talk when I've got so many pros around me, So
E.F. Hutton.
I think I think anybody in that position is going to have a great hope that they're not going to be convicted. It would be interesting. I'm sure he has a different thought process than even his attorneys do. I think somebody said it earlier, but I think the focus, the death penalty being on the table is a major motivator for a lot of things. And as long as that's out there, I think they're going to do everything they can to try to mitigate that and move away from him receiving the death penalty. I think it's a pretty tough road for them to hoe with the evidence that they've got. Because we're not just talking about circumstantial, we've got forensic, and we have behavioral, and it's how all of, not just those things as individual things, but how they all interplay and interconnect with one another, going even to the point of, I think you've got witness assistants or whatever saying, they're starting to wonder, did he do something, and I think there was at least alluded to the fact that dad felt that way. Well, where does that come from within the greater context of it? But I think as long as the death penalty is on the table, I'm sure he doesn't want to die. Most people, it's hard to find somebody who wants to die. So I think, he's going to do everything he can. Whether or not he believes in his heart of hearts, maybe he does. He obviously thought he could get away with this, and until he got caught. So.
Well answered. Great job. How about KJ asks, do you think he was Papa Rogers? This was the social media avatar that kept popping up on, I think, Reddit, 4chan, as well as in some of the chats on various platforms throughout social media. Do we know? I mean, does anybody know?
I'm not familiar
I think
with it.
I think we could say in general terms that, and it is something that was in that video that you were showing from December that we discussed, is that if this guy is guilty, the type of offender he appears to be is the type that tends to partially assert power, domination, and control through manipulation of the media, writing to police, so forth, like Son of Sam, Ted Kaczynski, the Zodiac Killer, so forth, where you're less overtly sexual, you're kind of inadequate, you get that godlike feeling from manipulating. And so we anticipated that this is somebody who would certainly be watching the press and who might insert himself into it. But whether he actually was Papa Roger is unclear. But I would certainly think that this is somebody who in some way insinuated himself into the conversation and was watching everything meticulously, partially to see if he was going to get caught, and partially because it was kind of titillating. If I remember correctly from the Dateline episode, he had something like 60 images of people talking about him on shows and things. And I have to say, for somebody who might be concerned about capture, it's a stupid thing to save on your phone. There's a lot of stuff that was saved on their phone that seemed pretty dumb for somebody that was trying to be some kind of master criminal. I mean, the trail that's left is really silly. And I mean, that's the whole thing that's so striking about him, is you have somebody studying who supposedly, could write off a good paper about how to avoid capture, is studying this stuff from really smart people, but then makes dumb mistakes. And that's,
do we know
that's
how
the
many
piece of it
sorority
that
pictures and or Bundy pictures he had? Have they released any of that? Do we know?
we haven't been told the amount, but there certainly is, it looked like a lot of pictures of women that were associated with the sororities in Idaho.
Can you imagine
We don't
being
know the
one of those
number.
young ladies and watching Dateline and seeing your photo pop across the screen from Bryan Kohberger?
Even though they're blurred. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
And can you imagine? Holy
Yeah.
cow. So John O'Reilly, good Irish name, John. Explanation for leaving a ninth sheath behind. Thanks. I know we covered that earlier, but maybe we give them a Reader's Digest version. We believe he was attacking Maddie and Kaylee. And during that attack, Xana had gone up because she heard the noise, what was going on, went up. The belief is that they confronted one another and she ran and he chased her downstairs. And that was the moment they believe that he dropped the knife sheath out of the confusion going after Xana. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
that's correct.
And he attacks her. And by the way, this is also another concept that I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about. There's that cast off blood on the railing going downstairs. That's going to be interesting. Could that have been previous? Could it have been cast off from, Ethan? In terms of, when he's leaving, blood goes everywhere. We all know that. And, I've seen stuff where, we had a case where a woman was brutally attacked in a park, and the suspect dropped a 40-pound rock on her. And we found stuff on his shoes later on. So anything is possible without knowing for sure. We want to be careful. KDH, Do you guys think him purchasing another knife means the first one was irretrievable? He must have had a pre-dug hole somewhere along the route. And I know, Greg, you and I talked about it, and you mentioned it on the show where that Snake River was probably in play, where he would have thrown his stuff. What do you think?
Well, it's certainly possible. Wherever he put it, it's going to be difficult to find it and difficult to retrieve, and that would be an ideal location.
Yeah, I agree with you. Why do you think he bought another knife?
Well, he has to show that he has what he purchased to begin with. At least that's the thought process behind it. Because the only thing that he doesn't have, well, he doesn't have either one, so he has to replace both if he thinks he may become potentially a suspect.
Okay.
That's one thought.
Well, I'm curious to see what forensics found in his car. If any, I'm wondering how deep clean he would have done. That is a great question. But like Dr. Brucato was talking about, he's kind of scattered with having, periods of complete control and periods of no control, i.e. the photographs, etc. What do you guys read into that? Because he is kind of all over the map, like you were talking about. But is he an organized or disorganized offender around the group?
Well, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Greg. Go ahead.
No, let's go for you.
Well, I think he starts out organized, what he wants to do and how he's going to carry it out, and then he got 4 victims, and that's pretty hard to stay organized. Managing it. So, and then from what you've described afterwards, he looks like he gets pretty upset in leaving, and takes a bit of time to calm back down.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's mixed, and it's mixed based upon what happens throughout the process of the crime.
Do you think he's watching us tonight? If he has access to a tablet?
I think if he's aware.
Should we say hello? You know me, Greg.
Well, thanks.
I know. Well, if you are watching, maybe we can set up a time we can come talk. That'd be kind of interesting. Okay, do you guys have anything else? Oh, I know what I want to end on. So, Anne, you talked about Ed Kemper back in November,
Right.
or excuse me, December, where he weighed in.
Right.
Tell everybody about that, if you recall.
Well, what I found interesting is one of the first things he said had to do with cars. He wanted to know more about the cars. Now, don't forget, I showed him, or I didn't show him, but I sent the photos for him to look at, and it was the one that you had early in the program, where the cars are all lined up in the back. So he was very interested in that. I just thought that was pretty true, that the car is one that has been very prominent in this. So that was one question. Then the other place is he wanted to figure out how you would get into that. And you had shown the picture where he is looking down as asked us if we thought this was a very good place for him. I just thought, in retrospect, how interesting that the 2 things that he really brings up and talks about are things that we also talked about. Obviously, he had not seen anything about this case, as best I know. I think they had asked him that.
Wow. I mean, help the audience understand when other serials are out there, how important it is to go in. I want to set this up do you think if the death penalty is taken off the table, hypothetically, and now he goes to prison for life, hypothetically, do you think he's going to want to do all kinds of interviews with people?
Oh, I think he will. There's a
Very much.
narcissism.
Yeah.
Absolutely. he'll want to talk about it if he's. I would say yes. I don't
Yeah.
know. What's everybody else think?
I
Definitely.
agree. I agree with you, Ann.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
he's got nothing to lose at that point because he's not going to appeal
Right.
if he pleads to it.
Right.
Yeah, and he's going to want to control every pen stroke, isn't he?
Yes, and correct the record.
Well, I find it fascinating. They've already had a survey, right? Remember, somebody went out and hired that guy to do the survey for all
Right.
The jurors
Right.
in the community to get the trial moved. I think he was behind that. I think you said that a long time ago, Gary, that it wouldn't surprise us. Or Greg, one of you said it, or it may even been you, and it wasn't me. Well, I'll just make that for the record. But this idea of, man, that was so insightful that all of a sudden there's a survey, yet, part of his PhD program or his thesis, he's asking criminals, what it felt like. And then he's studying Ted Bundy. That was a Freudian slip. He's studying Ted Bundy of how he felt, right, Gary? That he had a dual personality going on internally. I think Gary just froze.
No. I'm here. I don't. Maybe I blipped out on your end, but I heard everything.
Okay, you're here. So, wasn't he studying what this secondary personality inside of him, or what's that all about? Break that down for the audience.
Well, I mean, I guess it's not that. I'm just saying. I think that might have been part of the appeal in the fixation on Bundy because we know, like they showed what he downloaded. I mean, you could go online and download the paper yourself, and you could see, that there would have been an interest in that internal experience of, that went on with somebody like Ted Bundy, and it is interesting to do that. But I think, there are a few reasons that there could be the identification with Bundy, and some of them are very concrete. For example, Bryan Kohberger's birthday is only 3 days apart from Ted Bundy's. Things like that. There are these weird little things that seem to connect them. That's interesting too. And then, of course, you remember, Chris, that there was the interesting question that came up for us on your show about a year ago about the park that was given as the alibi site was a place where a body was found, where the question has always existed if that was a Bundy victim. Bundy was asked about that victim at the time of his execution and wouldn't say if he had killed that victim.
I mean,
That victim
what are the odds
came
of
from
that?
Pullman.
We've got to do the correlation. We've got to do two columns. I mean, what are the odds that wasn't that his first victim, they thought?
If Bundy killed the woman that was found in the park, wherever you pronounce it, it would have been, although there are some people that believe he killed at 14. Bundy killed at 14. But it is interesting that woman, who met the physical characteristics that are supposedly typical of the Bundy victims, although some people say that's a myth, was from Pullman. And the person who was following her around before her disappearance looked like Ted Bundy and drove a VW Bug. And, so it was never confirmed. He was asked about that case and would not say.
He took it to the grave.
And so it is interesting that someone who we now know is studying Bundy may have, as an homage to him, said, "Oh, you know what my alibi was? This park." When only somebody with a lot of intricate knowledge of the Bundy case would know that there was a potential tie to Bundy in that park. And it's the one that Bundy may have gotten away with, which is interesting too. So that I can't help but wonder about that. I don't know. And also the other thing is, just to get it on the record saying so, we forget that the school Bundy went to in Washington was actually 300 miles away from the one that Kohberger went to. But it's the same state. And that's the other question. I mean, I actually was hoping the group would address it. Do we think he chose to go to school in Washington as an imitation of Bundy? Or is it just a coincidence? I'm just curious what people think about it. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
I mean, if you,
Yeah, at some point you have to look at all the coincidences and then make the decision. Nah, it's no coincidence. I'm not as familiar with respect to those coincidences that you're talking about, other than he's obviously enamored by Bundy, and he's done a lot of research on him. He's taken photographs that reflect images, similar images. But there are a lot of differences in the way in which he's committing his crime as well, that we are aware of how Bundy committed his crimes, at least from the evidence. And there's some similarities, but possibly. I think it is worth what you're saying, Chris, to do a item by item checklist to look at those similarities. It may allow one to give an opinion, conclusive opinion about it.
One of the things you could do is find out if he applied to any other schools, or is that the only school that he applied to?
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be hard to. You wouldn't have to ask him. I think other people might even know. But if it's the only school, that even narrows it down to being no coincidence.
And what other schools did he apply to that he may have been rejected?
From a lot of criminology programs. That is not a only.
Right.
well, I tell you, that's going to go on the list here. I'm going to make that happen. So here's a question. It's a doctor question. What kind of people idolize people like BK and why? I think there's a new phenomenon here. I mean, Luigi's getting his own Broadway show.
Well, look who Luigi has as a mentor. Ted Kaczynski. Talk about a 180.
Are you serious?
No, yes, I am serious.
Wow.
They all have somebody. That's what I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, yeah, I mean, that's for another show, but that's very interesting.
Well, makes you think of the Star Wars movies when.
Yeah.
Giovanni Ramos says
when Yoda is talking about Sith analog to Jedi's, and he says there's always two. Yeah. There's always two, that they come in pairs, that you have a mentor and a student. And it is interesting like that. I mean, you've got to have somebody to be a parentified figure that you learn from, that you look up to.
Right.
And these people are all building on the people that came before. Which is really disturbing, but it is what it is. But I think what the person is getting at is a phenomenon that, and I have to say, I think people abuse this word, but what they're talking about is hybristophilia. That is a paraphilic disorder, and it probably should not be applied willy-nilly to anybody that has an admiration for an offender or a potential offender. But what they're talking about is people who are aroused by or fascinated by people who have committed violent crime. And the literature tells us that there's a whole bunch of reasons. Sometimes the people who have those feelings have been abused and are attracted to an offender for that reason. Some of them want to narcissistically bask in the glory, of having something to do with the offender. Some of them are attracted to the idea that the relationship with them would be very safe because they're in jail and won't be able to ever touch you. There's no need to consummate. They're never going to cheat on you. It's like the perfect relationship in your mind, right? You think, for example, of Doreen Loy and Ramirez, right, where she's infatuated with him and all that. And so there's a lot of different reasons for it when it happens. But I also think that with Kohberger, what you've also got is a lot of these people that think that being contrarian makes you intelligent. And they love the idea of saying, no, you're wrong. The DNA was planted. It was somebody else. He was stargazing, and a drone brought in the sheath with his DNA and dropped it in the house, really bizarre stuff. But I think that it has to do with this thing of just kind of wanting to identify with and defend the person that you think is being misunderstood. And so there's that too. So there's got interesting stuff going on. But what I have to say is, having monitored what I'm seeing on the internet after the Dateline episode, I think it had a huge impact. What you're seeing are a lot of people who are abandoning that support and saying, I'm really grossed out by some of what I saw. You know, I can't defend somebody who was Googling, allegedly Googling, forced essay kind of stuff. So that I think you're starting to see that support collapse. And it's fascinating psychologically, that question of what is the tipping point that makes a person stop idealizing and being attracted to somebody and move in the direction of being grossed out. But I think you're seeing the tide turn on that, and there are going to be some diehards and all that, but we'll see. But the phenomenon has been fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it is a fascinating phenomenon because I think there's some psychopathy going on in just that in of itself, right? There's a platform here where anybody can say and do anything that they want. Yet at the same time, you have a guy like this who the authorities are saying, look, there is some violent, inappropriate material here that nobody would watch. And it's almost like you're re-victimizing women by defending, the individual that would have that kind of material. Because imagine, having a courtroom full of cheerleaders with Ted Bundy. And I think the most interesting dynamic that takes place is they accuse the family. We had Christy on the other night, and she goes, and it was so profound and so deep, and you could feel her pain, the mother of Kaylee, where she goes, my daughter was murdered, and they're blaming me. I mean, what do you say to that in a social, cultural context? I don't know what to say anymore. Are we that far away from our own feelings that we have to victimize, mothers?
Or victims. I mean, there may be victim blaming as well, which is common among a certain part of society.
Sure.
Imagine Luigi's wife, or excuse me, the victim who Luigi killed in broad day, on video in Manhattan, and his wife with kids is now watching a Broadway show about the murder of her husband, who's been executed, and they haven't even brought him to justice yet.
Yeah.
It's a social. I hope the social scientists weigh in at some point, because I really believe we've kind of gone off the rails here for a moment, but in society. But that said, and I think it's a worldwide program, and social media has made it, I think expanded it, magnified it extensively. So getting back to Mr. Ramos here, each victim died differently despite quick killings. Can you explain on this, especially as the last victim allegedly fought back?
I'm not sure what he means by they died differently. It seems very similar to me. It's the use of a lethal weapon, lethal knife, particularly. The only difference on the last one was the fact that she heard something and interrupted him on his way, either finishing up the first two crimes or on his way out, coming downstairs, and chased her downstairs because he had to take her out as a potential witness.
Yeah, and I think also you can't forget that this happened in a window of 13 minutes, and you have 4 people killed. And when I say 13 minutes, I'm talking about that's when his car is seen pulling in. He's got to get out of the car. He's got to make entry into the police. He's got to kill all 4 of them. He's got to take a moment and sit in that chair, and he's got to encounter the last individual that he leaves, gets back out to his car, and is seen leaving at 4:20. So, and it's all done with a knife. So I think it really falls right.
Bless you.
Well, the difference that's hilarious. Where I think there is a difference is the difference between what happens with the women and the male, in
The carving.
the sense that the male is so quickly dispatched with one blow, and the others are brutalized a lot more.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that figures into motive and the feelings towards women, and the primary focus probably having originally been sexual. One thing that we didn't talk about at all was the knife chosen? And we said this in our video in December. We speculated about it, but do we think that the knife was chosen because it was a kind of compensation for sexual inadequacy? Is it an extension, a phallic instrument? Is it chosen for that reason? Because I think this is a profoundly sexually inadequate person who probably wouldn't have been able to commit an essay, and even if they had tried. And so I think that it's interesting to think about what he would have felt about that blade. And I just wonder, do you guys see that as having a kind of sexual undertone to it? The use of the knife and the darkness and the bed and all that?
Sure. I agree.
Yeah.
I think this was definitely a sexual homicide.
Yeah.
I think it's very personal, and I agree with you, Gary. I think that if he had attempted, the individual would have attempted an essay, that he would have been unsuccessful, satisfying it. And I also believe that this particular personality, if the initial target, or the primary target, put it that way, in the initial two victims, if they presented themselves to this particular personality, offering themselves on a mutual or consensual interaction, I don't think this individual, this offender, would have been successful in engaging even in that situation if it was a consensual relationship, because I don't think this person doesn't believe that they are worthy of that type of that victim was worthy of a legitimate relationship with this individual. I think he felt that he was unworthy, uncomfortable around people like that because of that, their level of their type of personality, their beauty and attractiveness. This individual knows that he's not capable and he's not worthy of that kind of a person because he doesn't believe that he is. And that's why they become focused on that type of a victim, because he wants to show that he will be successful.
So you do it when they can't see you.
Or try, but I don't think he's capable because of his own mental state. It's all, he may on his own, engaging in activities that satisfies himself. But when it comes right down to it, I don't think he knows that he's not capable. He knows that he's not worthy and would be unsuccessful in that effort.
Yeah, and to dovetail into what Greg is saying, that's why I think Kaylee, her face area is that brutal head trauma is probably using the hilt of the knife. It's like, you're ruining my fantasy. You're not supposed to be here. And he just, after he takes Maddie, he just explodes even further onto her. And now Xana, allegedly shows up in the room. I mean, he's got multiple interruptions going on here with what was being planned, for quite some time. Am I off base there, Greg, on that thought process?
No, I don't think you are at all.
Well, I think to the original question, if we look at the timeline, the knife was chosen and purchased long before the victim was identified. I mean, he didn't have from everything we've seen, it was much later after the purchase of the knife that he has any awareness of any of the victims. So it was separate from the, it wasn't like he had a victim and said, now I'm going to go pick my weapon to go commit this crime.
No, Dean, I think that's a brilliant point. And I think what it implies is that first he had a fantasy of stabbing a woman to death because of these overarching themes. And women were kind of interchangeable. He selects the victim later because the fantasy is already there, probably fueled by by pee and other kinds of things and other behaviors. And then finally there's a precipitating event that gives it scope and makes it time to go in and do it. But the other thing is, and I haven't seen these points connected anywhere before, so I'm going out on a limb. But remember a couple of things. Number one, remember when that they said on Dateline that the Korean woman was where he is thought to have possibly used the camera to look at her. She apparently expressed romantic interest in him, and he had no interest in her. And then we have the story of him going on the date where he goes up into a woman's apartment and he tells her that he wants to tickle her, not do anything else, tickle her, making her extremely uncomfortable. She goes in the bathroom and waits for him to leave. In other words, we get the sense of a person who, it's like the dog who caught the car. If he got a woman interested, he wouldn't know what to do. He doesn't want to do anything with her because he's inadequate. So that I think that's the whole thing is that it's a fantasy that he's going to turn into this dark version of himself and go in and do this thing and assert this domination control, but he is a failure at it. And I think that ultimately it's the inadequacy of him that is in such stark contrast to this strange hybristophilic obsession that women have with him. That it's this sort of weird thing that the truth of the matter is that he would have been an utter and complete failure when it came to romance or relationships with women. And so I think that's why it was done in the dark with sleeping people, because if they saw him, I mean, they would have been like, get out of here.
Well,
and it doesn't. I don't think it fits his fantasy either. I think his ultimate fantasy is exactly the type of victim that he selected.
Yeah,
that's what he would love. That's what he wanted. That's what he preferred. But he's incapable of doing it. So what ends up happening is, well, I'll show you what I can do and what I'm able to do and capable of doing, and punishing him as a result.
Well, and to your point, Greg, didn't you find it interesting when they were talking about the pool party and he at some point focuses in on the two girls in the pool and moves in towards them, and the one who's married immediately, tries to get her husband's attention and moves over there. I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround on, being unsuccessful. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like she's immediately wanting to get me out of this mess. So that means whatever skill he's got going on there, and the men that are interviewed as well, their response is something's off. This is a little bit different. They didn't want to stay engaged for long periods of time. So I think that really fits to your point of, what you're talking about, not having them really there and aware of him being there. It fits much more into his fantasy.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
Fascinating. So let's end on this question here. And but before we do that, I want to thank all of you who've been with us tonight. I mean, we've had well over 6,000 people in this arena. And we really appreciate each and every one of you being with us tonight. And I'm hoping that maybe somebody at Dateline or something will put this panel together at CrimeCon. And then we'll take your questions live. Maybe if anybody knows somebody over at the show, they can, talk to them. But that said, Gummy Bears in Crime asked the question, what are BK's parents thinking in your collective experience? Thank you. I'm just going to speak for myself, having worked, homicide for so many years, that when they found out, if they know, they're devastated. Now, does that change the family dynamics? The most difficult piece of this whole puzzle for both families, all families, is going into that courtroom collectively. You're going to have half for the prosecution, and you're going to have half. The other half will be for the defense. And there will be a spirit of animosity that will grow as the trial progresses and it gets into the more vicious and brutal parts. Those family members, if they did not participate in Bryan's activities, are going to be beside themselves. They're not going to know what to do. I've seen defendants' families just break down, look over at the victims' families. I've seen them mouth, "I'm sorry. This is not our son. We didn't do this." I've seen the other side where it turns hostile. I'm hoping that everybody realizes that our system is in place to allow those scales of justice to be balanced during the court trial. Remember one thing about Lady Justice. She carries scales. She wears a blindfold, but she has a sword. And I hope that sword is not utilized in any way as it comes forward. And I'm trying to find one other question here that Maui girl had. Maui, can you put your question up one more time? I'm sorry, I had it up and I pulled it down by accident. Forgive me. I want to answer Maui's question, but I hope, Gummy Bears, that answers your question. And I hope we're civilized, as a society to let justice take its course. But also, let's not forget there are 4 victims here. Kaylee, Madison, Xana, Ethan. They're the ones we should focus on at this point, and let the defense focus on Bryan. Let them do their jobs.
It must be very hard having a Mother's Day when you lost your child.
Yeah. I did answer it. Okay, thanks, Maui. Thank you so much, everybody. Any last thoughts from the panel here, you guys? The Cold Case Foundation, we are a 501c3. We're always looking for support. You guys know where you can find Greg. Just turn on the TV. You'll see him over there with Dean and Hollywood in the other upper right-hand corner. We played Hollywood Squares tonight. I put these 2. And then, of course, the legend in the middle, Dr. Burgess. They actually did a whole program about her life, and justifiably so. And it is always a pleasure to have you on the program. Your wisdom, experience, and knowledge is just, it can't be matched. There is nobody that can match your wisdom, knowledge, and experience. And happy Mother's Day. I know you drove up from Maryland just for the program tonight. And, so thank you for
look, can I add to that, Chris?
Please.
About Ann. I've known Ann for a long time. we'll leave it at that.
Right.
But I will tell you that she, from the first time that I met her, I was a young profiler, just getting started, and immediately she became a mentor to me because I could.
Thank you.
And she was so accepting. She accepted everybody, regardless of their level of experience, as equal professionals. Now, our experiences obviously are different. Education is different, but she never utilized that in comparison to the people, the person.
Yep.
comparing herself as a person. She's equal to everybody else. And all she ever tried to do, and still does, is help elevate people all around her. And it's never been different from the very first day I met her. What a blessing she's been to us and to our profession and this particular genre.
Thank
what
you.
we do.
Well said. And then, of course, the quiet one, to that side of me, Mr. Dean Jackson, another phenomenal human being. A lot of, I call him E.F. Hutton because he sits in the background, and then when he says something, it's like everybody listens. He's got so much wisdom. He's an ordained minister too, by the way, for the record. And he's written books about delivering death notices because he was also a medical examiner investigator for many, many years. Death scenes all over the place with Dean. And as you can tell, he is just an amazing, bright soul. And he brings a lot of light into the lives of many, many people, including officers who are involved in officer-involved shootings. He has counseled many officers that have had to take the life of another human being, and he's got them through it. So, Dean, thank you always for being willing to jump up here on the panel. As always, I value our friendship and your wisdom. You teach me every single time I talk to you.
It's always an honor to hang out with you guys, and thanks to everybody for letting me hang out. I always feel like I'm in a doctoral program every time I sit down with everybody because it's just amazing the wisdom everybody has. So thanks again for the opportunity tonight.
Awesome. And then, of course, Dr. B, what can I say? I mean, we love you. You're a great human being, and I don't know how you do it. I really don't. You have been into the depths of, HELL, and yet you've managed, to keep pushing forward. And, that's really difficult to do as a human being, but you have that gift. And I don't know if people understood also you entered the seminary, but found another calling and what you're doing today is that calling. So I'm going to start calling you Father Brucato from this point forward.
What? Not Pope?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pope.
You stop me at Father? Okay.
Yeah.
No
You were
minor?
so inspirational and so wise.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the one-liners even tonight, like the dog that caught the car. I mean, I wrote that down.
Well,
I love that. That's just that wisdom that shows up. And so, brilliant friends. Happy Mother's Day to your moms and your wives and your friends, or your significant others, and also to our audience, Karen and I, and all of us at the Cold Case Foundation, as well as just in life. Thank you so much for supporting us, and we are eternally grateful for your love and that support. May we continue to be kind to one another. And that's why I always leave with the aloha spirit into Hawaii. So that said, have a blessed night. Happy Mother's Day.
Happy
Shaka
Mother's Day.
and aloha. See
Happy
you on
Mother's
the
Day to
next one.
Karen.
Yes, my sweetheart. I love you.
Yeah.
Happy Mom's Day. She got some flowers. They're sitting out there.
Oh, well.
And Chris, everybody can watch because people are asking, the Dateline episode can be streamed. If you missed it when it aired Friday, you can still view it.
And that what a
And
phenomenal.
I think it would be useful for people that are interested in the case to go back and screen it. I think it's going to prove to have been a sort of watershed in the case, because it revealed a lot of info that really mattered a great deal.
Yeah, I agree. Great. It was well done. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No time fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.